Do you understand the power of your own voice? Well, today's guest, you're going to understand when I say this that he has a unique voice and he's been using that voice to make a difference. What I also want you to understand is you have a unique voice, and we want you to understand that through today's episode, that finding your voice and taking that voice and that message that you have out into the world is a part of your calling as a person, your calling as a Christian, your calling as a believer. And we just believe that a part of you being faithful to that calling is to use your voice in the way that God called you to. So my guest today is Benjamin Lundquist. And I want to present to some and introduce to others Ben Lundquist. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it is such an honor, and hey, thank you for that voice introduction. But man, we've been trying to get on the podcast for a while, so it's a huge honor, and love all your coaching, business consulting, guiding, leading people. So it's an honor to be here, and thanks again for the invitation.
Man, you said it so right, Ben. We've been trying to organize this for a while, and look, Ben's a busy person, so let's just be honest, man. Like busy people, you got to, work with your schedule. And I thank you for making your schedule work for us. And secondly, we had to try to get some tech stuff together before we got to today. But I want to just give people a little bit of an introduction. I'm not going to kill y'all with a whole bio because we'll tease some of this out through the podcast. But Benjamin Lundquist is a top motivational and leadership, here we go, speaker, pastor, coach, and one of the leading voices for leadership development and empowerment for today's generation. Ben is passionate about helping students and helping professionals see their worth, see their value, crush limiting beliefs, and lead with, here's this word, excellence. All right, excellence. If you are watching this live, I need you to type the word excellence in the chat. The message that Ben shares is highly motivating, relatable, and equips students and professional audiences with tools that work. Ben is the host of the Rise and Lead podcast, and I can't wait to talk more about that, because that podcast ranks in the top 1% and has been downloaded in 130 plus countries around the world. Ben, so glad that you're on today. Folks are going to get a lot of value out of this conversation. And so I want to just lead off with this question, right? Because I could read a lot more about your bio and we're going to learn more about you. But let's surprise some people today. What's something about Ben Lundquist that even the people who think they know you would be surprised to learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think one of the surprising things that people often don't know about me, and you see, I try to share valuable content on Instagram, on the socials, and in the voice of the Rise and Lead podcast, which is solo episodes and also interviews like I've got the honor of doing with you. So people hear me speak quite a bit. What I think they would be surprised to know is that I used to be terrified to get in front of crowds. I didn't believe I had a voice. I was actually the last person you could ever imagine that would ever volunteer to get onto a stage. I didn't like writing on a whiteboard or a chalkboard. And so I actually had a large amount of social anxiety and fear about getting up in front of people. So it's kind of ironic that that's what I do for a living, is trying to speak life in ministry context and also, in the marketplace. But the skills that I have developed over, the last 20 or so years, I wasn't born with those skills. Those had to be cultivated. They had to be excavated. And if you want to ask me, even as a kid, hey, do you want to get up and maybe share a word, encourage some people? That was just not me. It wasn't in my spirit, to be able to do that. So, I think for a lot of people, the gifts that you see right now, the gifts that you use, a lot of people didn't recognize those within themselves for their whole life. And so I would just say there's probably a lot more in you than you see right now. And I think for me, the key was taking every opportunity to face those fears. And if the door opened up, I just made a commitment that I'm going to step through that door, as terrified as I may be in the moment. And I'm just going to see what that gift could become over time. So what you're seeing, which is in process now, is the culmination of 20 plus years of simply stepping through open doors and trying to steward the gifting that I uncovered over time, just trying to steward that well. And I'm a work in progress. Like, you're not seeing the final product. I'm a work in progress. And I just try to look for opportunities to hone the gifts, grow the gifts, to ultimately serve as many people as I can.
I love it, Ben. Wow. Now that is actually quite surprising for someone who is, and I've, let me go back a little bit with you, Ben. I had a chance to hear you at a youth conference
Yep.
called Just Claim It, and I want to say it might have been in Florida. I remember when you got up to speak, I was like, man, who is this guy with the, like, I'm sure this is what I thought. I'm sure this guy growing up played the voice of God in some play just because of the command that you had. And so to hear that this is something that you've had to work on, that speaking in public was not always coming easy to you, is definitely surprising to me. And I'm sure those people who are watching this, who've heard you, have had the opportunity to be blessed by you, it might be surprising to some others. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now, Ben, let's not, we're gonna get into all the slashes, right? Speaker and coach, but let's start here. You're a pastor, right?
Yeah.
And so, and this podcast is the Monetize Your Ministry podcast. And just in case this is your first time listening or watching, we don't just define ministry as pastoring or pastoral ministry. We believe everyone, God has given us a ministry. But I do want to talk about your journey in
Yep.
terms of pastoral leadership. When did you feel, sense, discover this calling to lead in that particular setting?
Yeah, I think I would trace it back to this. And for anybody who's a person of faith, you can see a case study of this in a little book of the Bible that almost nobody reads, that's called the book of Nehemiah. And the little nugget that I'll pull out of that is, Nehemiah had a role with the king, and he basically heard some news that broke his heart. And the brokenness of his heart, it pulled him into a calling to do something great. And I think for me, when I look back, there was a observation that I had often with the younger generation about not having the father figures, not having the voices speaking into their life in an empowering way, not having the mentors, that was heartbreaking for me. And so for anybody who is thinking about, where is going to be your path of impact, or how are you going to use what you have been given to impact the world, I want you to think about what breaks your heart the most, because what breaks your heart the most is often what you are called into to create the greatest change. So for me, it was a lot of the interactions I had with young people working at summer camps, also in faith communities, and also in the marketplace, the streets of the different cities that I was serving. And there was a heartbreak moment where I saw all the potential in these young leaders, but they had no voice speaking into them. Like, nobody was empowering them to believe in themselves. And so I think that was part of that calling, was just staying true to what broke my heart. And that was the lack of support, mentorship, and empowerment for the next generation that eventually kind of pulled me into ministry and beyond, of being able to do that full time. And I think that's, at the very core, that's what I have identified as my purpose, is I lead leaders who grow and impact other leaders. So the idea is, really to recognize every age demographic is a leader, that they've got leadership potential. And so my role now a lot is in the speaking, coaching, training, and empowering of leaders who are then impacting that original demographic that broke my heart in the very beginning. And so that's kind of the place that I'm at right now. But it was just kind of interesting that, it started with the recognition of something that really connected with your heart. And I think there's a time when, like, the passion to make a difference will be greater than the fear that is holding you back. And you so badly want to impact somebody with the passion that you have for a demographic, that you are willing to overcome, work through, step over that fear that has been holding you back, because your heart so connects with wanting to make an impact in that space and in that place. So yeah, that's kind of, I mean, ask a bunch of questions as far as
No,
details.
no. Yeah,
I've
yeah,
been
we'll
in
get.
space for, I guess the last 20 years. And there's been a ministry within faith communities, but just by the grace of God and how he has wired me, that has extended way beyond faith communities to being able to speak life into a lot of marketplace platforms, leaders who don't consider themselves men and women of faith. But I think it all started with that heart connection to really wanting to see the younger generation have every tool and belief and possibility to become everything that they could become. And I grew up with a great dad, and I'm not ashamed that I had a great dad, but I know everybody didn't have a great dad. And maybe part of my voice can be giving the younger generation or other leaders those words of empowerment that I did have on a lot of levels, but they may not have had, but being able to kind of carry that forward for other people.
Man, that's so good. Our guest today is Ben Lundquist. And by the way, if you're watching this, you need to, like, if you're trying to drive and watch this, pull over and
Uh,
get something to write stuff down, because Ben is going to keep dropping nuggets like this, right? Like you're hearing it, right? Your passion is greater than the stuff that's holding you back. And like, make sure you write stuff down, because
yep,
that's what we want to do. We want to put this stuff into practice. But Ben, take me, how young were you when, because you're mentioning your
yep.
heart was broken for this younger generation. But how young were you when you felt that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think where it really started for me, and I think this is such a key when it comes to clarifying your calling, because I think if you were to pull every audience member that you have, and this podcast is gold, but if you were to pull all your audience, 100% would want to have greater clarity on their calling. 100%.
Absolutely,
And
100%.
so I think it started for me, and I would just say this is a nugget for everybody. The more you serve other people, the greater clarity you will have on your calling. So for me, it didn't really come in high school. I think it came in early college for me. And I'm somebody who's had career and calling confusion for years, to the tune of, I went to 4 different universities. I've had almost 10 declared majors in college. And I always struggled with this idea of clarity and calling and career and how does that all fit together. But I think I began to get some clarity on that when I entered into a season of service. And for me, it happened through a faith-based summer camp where we were serving thousands of kids that were coming from Boston, the Boston metro in the northeast part of the United States. We were just serving and loving on kids. And the idea was that every kid that came to camp would leave 7 days later believing in themselves more, believing in their potential more. And out of that season of service for 3 months over a couple summers, I think something began to grow in me. And I think that's where, when you focus on service, you're going to realize my heart is connecting to a niche demographic in a different way. My story connects with a demographic in a different way. My gifting can be used in a unique way to serve and empower that demographic. So clarity for me, it came in the early stages by just serving, like getting off the couch and saying, I have something that I can offer the people around me: encouragement, gifts, skills, abilities, opportunities, all that kind of stuff. And through serving, I think I begin to have some clarity on who was the demographic that I was the most passionate about serving. And as you serve, you begin to recognize, wow, I didn't realize my gift could be used in service in this way. So I think, and let me know if you resonate with this too. At
Oh,
the heart of
yeah.
calling, it's service. Like that is the
I love it.
heart of a calling. So if you have a calling that is about only serving yourself, you are selling your calling short. Because I think at the end of the day, your calling is to use, if you're a person of faith, but to use all the gifts and the abilities that God has given you to serve other people. So that's the end game with clarifying your calling, is that your life is going to impact a lot of people. And so
Right.
for me, that's kind of where it started, was the idea of I'm going to serve in whatever way I can. And out of serving, I'm going to be able to experience clarity of giftedness, of demographic niche that my heart really connects with, and how my gifts can reach, love, and empower that demographic. And kind of over the last 20 years, I've just been building off that foundation of service, even to where last week I was with one of the tight ends of the Seattle Seahawks having lunch outside of Seattle with the purpose of just spending 2 hours speaking into his life, because he's dealing with all the pressures of money and finances and the pecking order of the NFL football game. So I think for me, full circle, it really started with that idea of put yourself in spaces and places where you can serve other people. And if you'll do that, and you're really paying attention to what's happening in those spaces, you are going to experience clarity of giftedness, niche, demographic, calling, and ultimately purpose.
I love it. Ben, this is so in line with this podcast because we're talking about monetize your ministry. And we said ministry is service. And you're helping us to understand it. The way I find what my thing is to
Yep.
serve. For
Yep.
some of us, we want clarity. So we wait and we sit and we hope the clarity will just find us sitting, waiting
Yep.
for it. And you are helping us and just further reinforcing what we've heard before, which is serve and the clarity emerges. And it
Yep.
sounds like for you, one, you knew the audience, but then
Yep.
here's this word that you keep saying, right? And look, it's in the title of your podcast, Rise and Lead. Lead. Like
Yep.
talk to us about your passion for leadership and how you became clear that leadership is not just I know who I'm going to serve. And this is for someone here. You know your who, but it's the what. Like what am I bringing to them? Like when did leadership like that narrowing of leadership?
Yeah, I think a lot of the passion, if you will, that I had for launching a podcast that's now, hitting 140 countries and touching different people. And we could talk about just we could spend a whole podcast just talking about the doors of your life
Mhm.
that will open up when you are committed to serving people long term. Doors will open up for you when you're committed to serving. But to go back to
Mhm.
your question, I think for me, I had a working definition of leadership growing up that was limiting to my potential. And the definition was I just saw leaders as people, men and women, who had titles and positions. And so for years, I never saw myself as a leader because I thought I don't have that platform. I don't have that pulpit. I don't have that position. I don't have that title. And what I began to learn over time is that titles, platforms, and positions merely clarify responsibility to leadership, but that's not what makes somebody a leader. The fact is, every person who is listening to this podcast is a called leader. Every
Mhm.
person. So you have to redefine what leadership is so you can step into what you've always been called to. And so for me, I echo a definition by John Maxwell when it comes to leadership. And John Maxwell he's a faith leader, but he's a big voice in the marketplace of leadership as well. He defines leadership and simply as influence. And the idea is you have influence over somebody else. And that means that you are a leader because your voice and your energy and your time can shift the trajectory of somebody else's life. So if I was speaking to a group of middle school students, I'd be saying the words that you say as an eighth grader can shift somebody else's life. So your words are either going to build up or they're going to tear down somebody in your middle school. So that makes you a leader. But I think something we got to clarify is just because you're a leader does not mean that you are a great leader. It means that you can have leaders that are destructive. You can have leaders that are toxic, but you are a leader because you have influence. So the calling is to steward. This is so good. The calling is to steward our influence over our lifetime so we can continually pursue greatness of leadership. And I think greatness of leadership is maximizing over your lifetime the unique gifts and the abilities that you have for the positive impact on other people. And that can be written impact, that can be voice impact, it can be inspirational impact. But it's the idea that I want to be leading really well at 80, better than I am right now. So I'm going to always be pursuing levels of stewardship of influence so I can continue being a better leader, not just for a season, but I want to be a better leader for life. And that's why this podcast matters so much. And that's why conversations about leading yourself well matter so much. And that's why avoiding burnout matters so much, because you're not just called to lead for a season. You are called to lead for life. And if you're going to be a lifelong leader, you got to lead your life different, and you've got to navigate life different, because it's not just about influencing a season, but it's about influencing a lifetime with what you've been given.
That's so good, man. Ooh, leading for a lifetime, Ben. I'm picking up what you're putting down here. And I hope
Awesome.
y'all are picking up what Ben is putting down here. This is for everyone, right? Like, this episode is like one of those. If you're doing something wrong if you don't send this and share this with someone else. So, Ben, like, this message, first of all, the passion for leading leaders, especially
Yep.
when you talk about the younger generation, that was your calling. You get the clarity through service and leadership being that particular thing. But as we talk about here on this podcast, you did not keep that confined within just the faith world and the
Yep.
church world, right? You've moved that out.
Yep.
Talk to us about what are some of the first steps for someone who, like yourself, realizes, man, I have a message. This message is needed, not just by the people who can show up to my church, show up for my particular church event or my faith event. What steps did you take to begin to start moving that out to the wider audience, to the marketplace?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think I think everybody has the potential to have a much broader reach than they realize. So I would just tell anybody listening, stop limiting what you believe is possible for your impact, because you have already boxed in what you believe is possible for you. So I'll just give you kind of the reverse engineering of how it happened for me. The first key was to recognize who are you surrounding yourself with? And the thing is, if you are only surrounding yourself with leaders from a certain demographic, then you aren't going to grow to your fullest potential, but you're also not going to see the doors open up that you might have opened up to impact more people. So for me, I started showing up at the highest level world-class leadership conferences that I could show up at. And I wasn't even going for only faith-based conferences. I just wanted to be rubbing shoulders with the best leaders in the world. And I think that's such a principle for you to think about. Whatever your calling may be, how do you get around the best people in the world at the niche of influence that you are wanting to serve people from? Don't ask the question, who are the best people in my faith community? Who are the best people in my corporate job, as far as who you work for with the company, or my friend group, or my current mentoring inner circle? I want you to think about who are the best in the world at a gift that you want to cultivate or an opportunity you want to explore. So I just started getting around a lot more people. And when you do that, you're always going to enter the room with the idea that this is not about what the room can do for me. It's about what I can do for the room. So it's not about sales pitching your opportunity. Like, man, if you could give me the speaking opportunity, people can smell our ulterior motives right away. You have to have a heart that is anchored in, for me as a person of faith, who God says you are. You got to walk into rooms already recognizing your worth and value, and you have to approach the room of experts by saying, how can I humbly serve this room in a way that's going to add value to the room? Humbly for me means that I often am the last person to talk in the room. I'm the last person because I'm listening and I'm watching and I want to understand other people's stories so I can add value that is load bearing. People don't need fluff value. They want load bearing value. And you only can know what that is if you're listening and watching to the dynamics within a certain room. And also, I think you're just committing that as you connect with different people, I want to serve and enter into relationship with you long term. And so I think it's just being very intentional, using that wisdom, listening to your gut on when you say things and when you make invitations, when you offer things. So you've got the relational capital to where that's going to be received well. And I've overheard people walk into a great room and they are sales pitching the room within 30 seconds. And I'm just like, that rarely is the place and time to do that because you don't have the relational capital. Like, people, you don't know what the room needs. You don't know what people need. And so I think, again, the idea of, and I know I'm talking too much, but I think the idea of, it all starts with you understanding the innate worth and value that you have as a person. If you don't understand that, you have no real impact as a leader. And you're not going to be confident to step into rooms unless you really know who you are. And so I think when you have that foundation, for me as a person of faith, of saying, Benjamin's a child of God always, like royalty flows through his veins. Benjamin on any given day is completely accepted, extremely valuable, eternally loved, and totally forgiven. I have purpose that lives within me. So when you can be anchored in who you are as a person, you're not going to be intimidated to step into rooms where you can grow and where you can meet, new people. So, full circle, it was just getting into more rooms, over time, building relationships long term that are genuinely about serving other people, not about growing my own platform, but about what I can do for you. And then having the confidence to make the ask at the right time. And, I think just being aware of those moments, and the podcast for me was a big one. I sat on that, and I know you're a great podcaster.
I want to get into the podcast. So go ahead.
I sat on my podcast for 2 years because I didn't believe that I could create world-class content like male and female hosts who are at 100 million downloads. And I just didn't believe that. So I sat on a lot of insecurity, wrestling. I had all the doubts of, you're too late. You're like, people have launched podcasts for 6 years. Why are you even doing this? And there came a point where I really thought to myself, every insecurity that I'm feeling, somebody else has felt too. And every insecurity that I'm feeling, somebody else is battling with right now. And the only difference is, I'm either going to give in to the insecurities, the fears, and the doubts, or I'm going to push through them and see what this thing could become. And lo and behold, 4 years later, we're sitting at 140 countries being impacted on a regular basis. And it was just that idea of, keep going back to who you are. You got to know that. Have that mindset of, I'm humbly here to learn and to serve other people. And then think about, what is the offering of service that makes the most sense for you at the place that you are at. Some of you are writers. If you're a writer, write. Some of you
Yeah.
speak on a stage, speak on stages. Some of you have a voice, use your voice. Some of you are coaches, then coach. But what is it that you've been given to ultimately speak truth, share hope, and empower people, and do that through the means that makes the most sense for you?
Ben, that was so good, man. I'll tell you something that I got from you, and then I want to talk about the podcast. Service. Like,
Yep.
for people of faith, you really have, I'll call it a hack. Service helps to give you clarity
Yep.
as to what you're called to do, who you're called to, right? And just serving. We're not saying serve.
Yep.
Service helps to bring clarity. And then on the other side, now as I'm looking to move out, if I lead with that same heart of service, it helps me to get to the relationships that I need for my building of my business, building of whatever God has called me to. But never lose the heart to service, because it's not a negative, it's not a disadvantage. It's the thing that God uses to open the right doors for you. And I just heard that as you were talking, and I didn't want anyone to miss that. Someone is thinking, what do I do? And it's like, serve.
That's it.
Serve.
Yep.
All right, Ben, podcast. We got to get to the podcast, because all right. How many episodes are you up to?
Yeah, so my goal this year is to hit my 100th, and I'm at about 85 right now. Usually knocking out 1 or 2 episodes a month, and they're on a rhythm of either a 20-minute solo teaching or a guest interview like the one we're doing right now.
All right. So I said all the things, right? Pastor, speaker, author, podcaster, and listen, every time I'm online and I see your stuff, it's like epic content. That's the word I'm going to use. You use epic, and folks who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. Ben says stuff, you go, I got to write that down. How are you able to be as consistent and manage all of the things that we just talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. And I'll just say, I don't want to give the impression like I've got the whole hack of, balance and stuff worked out. But here's a couple things that I've learned. You have to know who you are, because if you know who you are, you can say yes and no to the right and wrong things in the season of life that you're in. And I think you just got to remember that when it comes to balancing out your whole life, a couple nuggets that have helped me out so much. One is recognizing when you say yes to more, you inevitably are saying no to something else, because you only have so much time and energy in a day. So you got to recognize it's a give and take. If you're going to give out 3 new yeses, you're going to be giving out 3 new nos inevitably. And those could be no's with your 10-year-old or no's with a date night with your spouse, whatever it may be. So I just think recognizing you got to be rooted in your identity so you can say no without feeling guilt for saying no. And you can also say no, recognizing that your identity, worth, and value never came from that invitation in the first place. You are already rooted in who you are. I see people burn out so much because of misplaced identity. They are hustling after an identity that is already theirs, and they're just saying yes to everything to the point where they got no fuel left in the tank. And if you drill down in an executive coaching type process, or just listen to people talk, it's often rooted in misplaced identity. That's why you're saying yes to too much, and that's why you can't say no, because your ego gets stroked at every invitation. And the end goal and the end product is you're burned out, and you've often compromised what really matters most in your life. So anchor your identity. Make sure that you are very clear on what matters most in this season. And I think that's something that I have been experienced a lot of freedom from, is just recognizing that it's not about life balance. Life balance is a fantasy. The idea is not to equally distribute your time and attention to every area of your life. This is key. The highest priority is to make sure that your highest priorities are highest priorities. That's the goal.
Oh, no, say that again. Say that again. No, you can't.
Right.
No, you can't. You got to say that again.
Your highest priority is to make sure your highest priorities are always highest priorities. That's what the goal is. And there's things that mattered to me 5 years ago that don't matter now because that's not a highest priority item right now. So for me, highest priority, number one, is always going to be my mindset in physical health. And we could talk all day about that. That's always number one priority. Because if I don't have the energy, I can't take care of the people that I need to take care of. So number one is always, for me, my mindset, my physical, emotional health. Number two, I'm married. It's always my marriage to Kim. We're almost at 20 years. So pumped about
Let's
that.
go.
But the thing is, like, I want to love my kids through the way that I love my wife. And so my mindset, emotional, physical health, number one. Number two is my relationship and marriage to Kim. Number three is me being able to be an engaged dad and father that is emotionally present and leading his kids. And so no matter what season of life I'm in, I'm always going to be saying yes and no to invitations and opportunities. So those highest priorities are always going to be highest priorities. I have turned down very lucrative speaking opportunities so I could be at my daughter's volleyball tournament on a Sunday morning. And it's not that I didn't explore other options, but I know that I've got a 13-year-old daughter. I'm not going to have another point in the future to be a dad to a 13-year-old girl. So I'm going to say no to certain things because I know my priorities 1, 2, and 3. I've got clarity on that. But I'll be honest, it's always going to be a struggle. And I think us as, it's not a male thing. It's a everybody thing. I know great female leaders who are burned out, and I know male leaders who are burned out too. But I think it's, when you built up such a great community around this podcast, but I think it's like surrounding yourself with the right people that help the most important things in your life to always be the most important things, and to give people around you permission to say, hey, call me out. Like if you see me compromising my connection with Kim, call me out. And, you ask about the social media content, podcast content, and that being life-giving. When your identity is anchored and when your highest priorities are highest priorities, life flows out of your life. And when life flows out of your life, it's simply a matter of taking the nuggets of overflow that come from your life and packaging those in a way that will bless people. So that may be a podcast episode. That may be an Instagram quote or an Instagram caption or dropping something on LinkedIn. But I think it's not, here's when it becomes complicated. When you are not in a life-giving season or place, you cannot produce life-giving content. That's when it becomes complicated. And that's when it becomes just this monotonous struggle of like, I got to wake up again. I got to do another post. It's such a grind. Listen, be a life-giving person and life will flow out of you. And then it's simply figuring out like, what is your bridge of getting the life that's flowing out of you to the people that you want to serve. For me, it's words. It's really comes down to words. It's words on a stage. It's words in a caption. It's words on a post, but it's often just kind of an outflow of being in a life-giving space that life just kind of flows out. And then you're just capturing those things. All of my 83 or 84 podcast episodes, which, that's small compared to some people's, like
it's big compared to some people though, Ben. It's big compared to some people, but go ahead.
But every episode that I've shared, especially the solo, like if you go listen to the 20-minute episodes, all of those are rooted in something that deeply impacted my life like that. And so my mind is like, if it really impacted me, I know somebody else needs that because I'm human. And so I try to craft episodes and content around things that have really impacted me, with the belief that it's going to impact somebody else.
That's
And
good,
again,
man. That's
I've
good.
had dry seasons, man. I've had seasons where I was at the office at 11 o'clock at night trying to knock out a podcast episode. And to be fully honest, I just had to say, it's just not the time. Like I'm not in the prioritization space. And I just had to walk away, give it a week, come back and knock that thing out.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've been
That's
there
good.
too, where it's like you can't force it. Like you're in the mindset or you're not in the
I know.
mindset. And so just trying to
Ben,
be in space.
Ben, this is so good. I think for so many of us, we want to wring stuff out of a dry towel, man. Like
Yeah.
as you're saying, man, just operate in integrity, in understanding your identity and your worth, making sure you're taking care of your mindset and your health, and then from the overflow, like making the
Yeah.
right things a priority, you'll be able to give to others, and they'll be blessed, and you'll be operating from a healthy place.
Yeah.
Ben, I know we're out of time, but I know we could do this for another hour, right? Because so many questions I have, like I didn't
Okay.
get a chance to ask you. But tell people how they can get more of what you're sharing here by telling us how to find your platform, find your podcast. Give us the info.
Yeah, and again, thank you for the huge opportunity, and I love the podcast. I love what you're doing, and I also love what you're doing with your hand in a lot of other spaces and places that maybe all the audience may or may not know of, but you're impacting a lot of people. So again, huge honor to be on the podcast. For any kind of like speaking invitation stuff, my website is riseandlead.com. And so you can check out riseandlead.com if you want to talk about any invitations for workshops, speaking, that type of thing. Or you can always just send me a DM on the IG, and I read all of those daily. So if you want to reach out in that way, the
What's
podcast
the IG?
IG is just my first and last name at Benjamin Lundquist, LUNDQUIST. And so at Benjamin Lundquist, and you can DM me, or if you just have any further questions about this conversation, like, something has been sparked about calling or career, we may have to do a follow-up episode and just dive into that. But yeah, so website, riseandlead.com. Rise and Lead podcast is all over the different platforms. You can find that. And then you can also hit me up on IG as well. But yeah, any way I can serve, definitely let me know. But it's just, yeah, again, I think that that real commitment to service, you just have no idea where doors will open up, for you in your life. And it was, a year or so ago that I answered a DM just by somebody who had connected with the podcast, and they were following a little bit of IG, but that one DM opened up one of the most incredible speaking opportunities that I've had with the University of Colorado entire football program and coaching staff. It was about a month before Deion Sanders got hired. So if you're
I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like,
if you're tracking about what happened, at Colorado. So this was about a month before he got hired. And this all came from the podcast. It came from consistent Instagram posting about just empowering content. A DM came in on a Friday night, and this interim coach said, "Hey, we're going to call you on Monday. Would love to have you come and speak to our entire team who's going to be playing Oregon State." And he actually called on Monday, and I'm on speakerphone with this entire coaching staff at University of Colorado. And here's the thing I thought was just such a moment of look at God, and you never know where your voice could end up going. He said, "We don't always give this permission and invitation to everybody," but he said, "As you come down and speak, you have full permission for an hour to talk about all the faith conversation you want. You can talk about God, you can talk about the gospel, you can talk about leadership." And I'm very aware this is a fully state-funded D1 university, and that permission is not given to everybody. but we just had the most incredible hour plus together with that team and just talking about principles of scripture and leadership and life. And then I actually left that speaking invitation within the next week, took the message that I gave in a keynote, and I built a podcast episode for the team specifically based on that keynote, and then was able to have their coaching staff send out the episode link to every single player and coach on the roster, which is incredible. And so again, God, for a person of faith, God just said, hey, can you go the extra mile? And the extra mile for me was take that next week, build a podcast episode specifically for those players built on the keynote to serve them. And then was able to do that episode just for them, released it to anybody else in the world, of course, but it was for them. And then that was sent out, to everyone on the coaching staff and the players. And that opened the door years later for me to be sitting last week in Seattle in a restaurant with one of the tight ends for the Seattle Seahawks, who I had met at University of Colorado. And we're talking about the fact that he had been in Nashville days earlier doing a tight end camp with Travis Kelce. I mean, just nuts stuff.
Wow.
But again, it's about how can you use what you have been given to serve people, but you have to do it consistently. The potential, you're not going to see it in 6 months. You're not going to see it in a year. You may not even see it in 2 years. You're going to see it in years of serving a demographic consistently with the gifts and the abilities that God has given you. So yeah, you just never know. But I would just, as a closing question for your audience to think about, that we are going right up to the wire here, but here's a question. I would be thinking about this. What are you called to do in this season that you are afraid to do that God needs you to do? And so what is it? What is that thing that you are avoiding out of fear and insecurity that in your heart of hearts, you need to do that thing? Like, you need to write that thing. You need to speak that thing. You need to launch that thing, whatever it may be. What is that thing that you are not doing or you're avoiding because of fear that you need to lean into and make that thing a reality?
Ben, that's how you drop the mic. That's how you end the podcast. I want to just encourage you folks, make sure you go check out the Rise and Lead podcast, the Rise and Lead platform. And here is my encouragement to you. Serve.
Yep.
Find that clarity. Continue to serve. And we challenge you to go increase your income and your impact.
Thank you for listening to the Monetize Your Ministry podcast with Kymone Hinds. For more information, visit our website at www.monetizeyourministrypodcast.com. That's www.monetizeyourministrypodcast.com. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Please share this episode with someone who needs it. Let's increase our income and impact.